This is part 2 of your Chapter 7 test. We're looking at TEK 10, C, and D, which say you have to be able to divide polynomials and simplify expressions. So number 8, I have already rewritten it. It is 15a squared minus 16a minus 15. Notice that we had to put that in standard form, which means the highest power needs to go first. So I have a squared followed by the a term followed by the constant. And then 5a plus 3 is what we are dividing by. So first thing I need to do is look at the first term of the divisor and the first term here in the dividend. I notice that I ask myself, how many times does 5 go into 15? Well, that would be 3. And a times what would give me a squared? That would be a. So now I need to multiply 3a times all of this. So 5a times 3a is 15a squared, and 3 times 3a is positive 9a. Now remember, I have to subtract all of this. So I need to take the opposite. So minus positive 15a, well, minus all of this. So that's going to change this to plus, this becomes opposite, and this becomes opposite. I'm distributing that blue negative sign to the 15a squared and the 9a squared. Now all I need to do is combine them. So 15a squared minus 15a squared, that cancels out. Negative 16a and negative 9a is negative 25a. Okay, we're just adding, so the a stays to the power of 1. We're not multiplying them. Then I bring down the negative 15. Again, I need to go back to the first term, which is that 5a, and ask myself, how many times does 5a go into negative 25a? So 5 times negative 5 gives me the negative 25, and then the a is just to the power of 1, so I don't need to put another a up here. So go ahead and multiply negative 5 times 5a plus 3. Negative 5 times 5a is going to be negative 25a. And then negative 5 times positive 3 is negative 15. And I'm going to subtract all of this. Well, when I subtract, it's the same thing as distributing that negative 1. So negative times negative 25a makes that a positive, and negative times negative 15 makes that a positive. So all I'm doing is combining the opposite. So negative 25a plus 25a cancels out, and negative 15 plus 15 also cancels out. So my answer is just 3a minus 5, because these guys over here all canceled out. This is my answer. Number 9, I've already rewritten it so that I can divide, and I have 12x squared plus 9x minus 7 divided by 3x. Pay attention to the fact that I need to put the 12x squared plus 9x minus 7 has to be in standard form, and I need to pay attention that I have all the powers there. So I have to the second power, to the first power, and then to no power. So now I'm good to divide. So 3x goes into 12x squared. So 3 times 4 is 12, and x times x would be x squared. So now you multiply these two. 3x times 4x is 12x squared. And we're going to subtract that. So 12x squared minus 12x squared cancels out. Bring down the 9x. Ask yourself, 3 times what is 9? Well, 3 times 3. So I'm going to put plus 3, and 3 times 3x will give me that 9x, so I don't need an x term right here. 3 times 3x is 9x. And I'm going to subtract that. So 9x minus 9x cancels out. Bring down the 7, or the negative 7. 3x does not go into negative 7. So that negative 7 is my remainder. So 4x plus 3 up here at the top, that's my answer. And since the negative 7 is my remainder, I'm going to write that as a fraction. So 4x minus 3 minus 7 over my divisor, which is 3x. This whole thing is my answer. Number 10, I have to rewrite it so that I can do long division, and I need my dividend to be in standard form, so 3d squared plus 2d minus 29. It's in decreasing order of powers, and d plus 3 is what I'm dividing by. So math is all about doing the same thing over and over. Everything stays the same. So I'm going to take the first term here and see how many times it goes into my first term over here. So d times what would give me 3d squared? So 3 times d would give me the 3d, and then I need another d to get that squared term. So now I'm going to multiply all of this times 3d. 3d times d is 3d squared, and 3d times 3 is 9d. I'm going to need to subtract all of this. When I subtract, what I'm really doing is distributing that negative. So negative 1 times 3d squared is negative 3d, and negative 1 times positive 9d is negative 9d. So now I can just combine everything. So 3d squared minus 3d squared cancels out, and that's supposed to. And 2d minus 9d is going to give me a negative 7d. Bring down the negative 29, and then go back, do the same thing. That d term goes into the negative 7d. What would I need to multiply to get that negative 7d? I would have to multiply by negative 7. So negative 7 times d is negative 7d, and negative 7 times 3 is going to be negative 21. I need to subtract this. When I subtract, I'm distributing that negative, so negative times negative 7d makes that positive, and negative times negative 21 makes that positive. So now all I'm doing is combining everything. Negative 7d plus 7d cancels out. Negative 29 plus 21 is going to be a negative 8. There are no more terms to bring down, so that negative 8 is my remainder. So I'm going to write what I got on top, which was 3d minus 7, and my remainder was negative 8, so it's going to be minus 8 over d plus 3. That's what I was dividing by. And this is my answer. For number 11, it's 25n cubed minus 11n plus 4 divided by 5n plus 4. If you look at this, you'll notice that when I rewrote it so that I can do my long division, I have a missing n squared term. Okay, the original problem doesn't have n squared, so I just need a placeholder, which is why I put the 0 n squared. I just need that as a placeholder so that my division works out. Once I rewrite it with that placeholder, again, I'm going to look at this first term and this first term and ask yourself, what can I multiply 5 by to get 25? Well, I'm going to multiply that by 5, and then n times what would give me n cubed? Well, I would have to multiply n by n squared. So now take that 5n squared and multiply it by this whole thing. So 5n squared times 5n is going to give me 25n cubed. And 5n squared times 4 is going to be plus 20n squared. I need to subtract all of this. Well, when I subtract, I'm distributing it negative, which is the same thing as adding the opposite. So I'm just going to change these signs. These first terms cancel out, and then 0n squared minus 20n squared is going to leave me with negative 20n squared. Bring down that negative 11n. Go back to the first term, 5n, and ask yourself, how many times does 5n go into negative 20n squared? Well, I'd have to multiply 5 times negative 4 to get that negative 20, and then I'd have to multiply n times another n to get that n squared. So 5n times negative 4n is going to give me negative 20n squared. And 4 times negative 4n is going to give me negative 16n. Same thing, I'm going to subtract all of this. When I subtract, I'm really distributing the negative or adding the opposite. So negative times negative makes this positive. Negative times that negative makes this positive. And I'm going to add. So these guys cancel. Negative 11n plus 16n is going to give me a positive 5n. And I'm going to bring down this plus 4. Okay, so 5n, this 5n, goes into this 5n one time. So I'm going to plus 1, and I need to multiply 1 times all of this. Well, 1 times 5n is 5n, and 1 times 4 is 4. And I need to subtract all of that, which is the same thing as adding the opposite. And notice how these guys all cancel. I have a 0 remainder. So my answer is going to be 5n squared minus 4n plus 1 with no remainder. So this is it. Numbers 12, 13, and 14 you had to simplify and then also state any excluded values. Remember that an excluded value would be the value of x that would make that whole denominator 0. And we have to state that because if you have a fraction, the denominator can never, ever be 0. So the first thing you need to do is look at your numerator and your denominator and see if you can factor anything out. When I look at 2x squared plus 6x, I notice that 2 and 6 have a common factor of 2. So I'm going to pull out a 2, and I also notice that I could take an x, 1x, out of each one of those terms. So I'm going to factor out 2x. So 2x times what would give me 2x squared? That's going to be x. So 2x times x is 2x squared. Plus 2 times 3 would give me that 6, and then x is just by itself. So 2x times 3 gives me that 6x. So that numerator is now factored. 10x to the third, that's a monomial. We can't factor anything out of that. It is what it is. So I'm going to rewrite that. Now I'm going to go and look for anything that I can simplify. 2x, well actually let's look at this, 2 and the 10. I can simplify that. 2 goes into 2 one time, and 2 goes into 10 5 times. I also can cross out one of these x's. This x right here will cancel out one of these x's. So instead of 3 x's on the bottom, now I only have 2 x's on the bottom. So I can rewrite my numerator, since the 2x is all canceled out, I can rewrite my numerator as just x plus 3 and my denominator is going to be 5x, and I had 2 of them left, so 5x squared. And that is your solution, or that is the simplified form of my original expression. So now I have to come back to this x value over here in my original denominator and ask myself what value of x would make that whole denominator, this whole thing, 0. Well, just think about this. If I put a 1 right here, if x was 1, 1 to the third power is going to be 1, and 10 times 1 is 10. So if I put a 1 there, it's not going to go away. The only number that I could put in place of this x would be 0, because I would have 10 times 0 to the third power. Well, 0 to the third power is 0, so 10 times 0 would make that whole denominator 0. So my excluded value is going to be x cannot be 0. So this is my entire answer right here. You have to state the simplified form and the excluded value of 0. So number 13, m minus 3 divided by 3m minus 9, or over 3m minus 9. So I take my numerator and I see if anything can be factored out of this guy, and it cannot, so I'm just going to rewrite that. And I'm going to take my denominator and see if anything can be factored out of 3m minus 9. Hopefully, catching on here, that the 3 has the same factor as the 9, so I can pull out a 3 from there. That's what they have in common. So 3, pull that out. 3 times m would give me 3m minus 3 times 3 would give me that negative 9. Okay, always double check that this gives you this. And I believe it does. So now I'm going to look at this and see what, if anything, can cancel out. And I notice that this m minus 3 and m minus 3. Okay, I have one on top and one on bottom. When I cancel that out, really, that means the same thing as 1 over 3. So that is my simplified form. I need to go back to my denominator and see what my excluded value would be. What value of m would make my denominator 0? So the easiest way to do that, since I have 3m minus 9, I'm going to put 3m minus 9 equal to 0. Because if I can solve it and see what value of m equals 0, then that's my excluded value. So to solve this equation, I'm going to add 9 to both sides. Negative 9 plus 9 cancels out, and I'm left with 3m equals 9. To get m by itself, divide by 3. So here, m equals 3. When m is 3, then my equation is 0. So my excluded value is going to be m cannot be 3, because when it is, then my denominator is 0. So my total answer right here is 1/3. That's the simplified form, where m cannot be 3. Last one, number 14. 2a squared minus 4a plus 2 over 3a squared minus 3. Okay, trick question. What's the first thing you have to do? You have to look for common factors. So take your denominator. What do they have in common, all three of those terms? I think I can pull out a 2, and that will be about it, because not all three terms have a in common. So the only thing they have in common is the 2. Pull that out, and the leftover inside the parentheses will be what I need to multiply by. So 2 times what gives me 2a squared? That would be a squared. Minus 2 times what would give me 4a? Well, 2 times negative 2a. would give me that 4a in the middle, and then plus 2 times what gives me 2? That would be 1. So there's my numerator. Going back to my denominator now, let me pull that out. 3a squared minus 3. Well, I can pull out a 3, and that's about it. Both terms don't have an a. So if I pull out the 3, 3 times a squared gives me 3a squared minus 3 times 1 would give me negative 3. Now as I go back and look at this, I'm going to look at my numerator again, and I have 2 times a squared minus 2a plus 1. Well, I'm going to see what happens if I try to factor that a squared minus 2a plus 1. And the reason I want to factor it, or I think I can factor it, is because I have that a squared. That's a perfect square, so I can do a times a. And 1 is also a perfect square. I can do 1 times 1. Now I need to play with the signs. My middle term is negative 2a. So I have to multiply them together and get a positive, but add them together and get negative 2. So if both of these are negative, negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1. This guy right here. And then if I look at these middle terms, I have negative 1a and another negative 1a. So that gives me that middle term right here of negative 2a. So now I have completely factored that numerator. I'm going to see if I can do the same thing for the denominator, because I also noticed that it is a squared minus 1. A is a perfect square, 1 is a perfect square. So pull out the 3, I already did that, and I'm going to see if I can factor that a squared minus 1. So a times a and 1 times 1. Now this time I don't have a middle term, which means they had to have canceled out. So one of them had to be positive and one of them had to be negative. So this is going to be 1a and this is going to be negative 1a. So they do indeed cancel out. Now I have completely factored everything. I'm going to see what in my numerator cancels out, if anything, in the denominator. So a minus 1 and a minus 1. So these guys will cancel, and this is an a minus 1 and this is an a plus 1. So those cannot cancel. They are different signs. So I have 2/3 with a minus 1 on top and a plus 1 on the bottom. Okay, that is simplified. Some of you might want to go back, or might have wanted to go ahead and multiply these back, and that's fine. If you did that, that would be 2a, that's an equal sign, sorry, 2a minus 2 on top of 3a plus 3. So either answer I accepted, but we do have to go back and see what our excluded values are. In order to give myself some room, I'm going to go up to the very top and I'm going to erase some of this so that I have some room to write. So my excluded values are where my numerator is equal to 0. So I'm going to take, let's see, whoops, I'm going to take this guy right here. I'm sorry, not my numerator equals 0, my denominator equals 0. So I'm going to look at this guy right here. And I need to ask myself what value of a would make that whole denominator 0. The easiest way to do that, and now that we're into quadratics, this is going to start to make more sense to you. This is completely factored. So I'm going to set each one of these factors equal to 0 and solve for a. So I'm going to have a plus 1 equals 0, and then I'm going to take a minus 1 and equal to 0 and solve for a. So plus 1 to get that to the other side. So a equals negative 1. And if I do a minus 1 equals 0, I'm going to add 1 to both sides. So I'm going to get a equals 1. So when a is negative 1, my denominator will be 0. And when a is positive 1, that makes the denominator 0. So my excluded values, I'm going to come back down to the bottom, my excluded values are going to be a cannot equal negative 1 or positive 1, because when it does, it'll make that denominator 0. So here is my answer. Remember, you could have this first term, you could have written it like this or like this, but everybody needs to have these two guys. So there you have it. If you did not understand anything, you need extra help, have questions, please, please, please come to tutoring Monday, Wednesday, Friday mornings in room 116. Those are the avid tutors. Monday, Wednesday, Friday afternoon, C lunch in room 110. That's Miss Castro's room. Tuesday, Wednesday morning in either Miss Castro or Miss Tanner's room. Please make time to get your questions answered. Don't forget you have to do the extra practice, which will be posted, and it will come from your book. You have to do that, those two things, corrections and the extra practice, before you will be allowed to retest. All retests must be taken by next Friday, April 13th. Okie dokie.